Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist Jessica Rinaldi is our guest on today's episode of The Crit House. Jessica is a staff photographer for the Boston Globe. In 2016, she was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in feature photography for the life and times of Strider Wolf. Today, Jessica talks about images that have influenced her, from Alex Webb, Josef Kudelka, Stan Grossfeld, Lisa Krantz, and Chris Hondros. Jessica, it's lovely to have you on the program.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yep, I have been working to try to get better representation from the world of photojournalism, and you're a part of that. So thanks for coming to represent photojournalists on the program.
Well, we appreciate that. We're an underrepresented part, I think, of the photo world in some ways. So,
but greatly appreciated, I think, of what you do for the world of photography. I mean, you're a photojournalist, but how do you talk about yourself photographically? I mean, are you just a photojournalist? I mean, how do you think of yourself and communicate who you are?
I try not to typically, but no, I mean, I think I am someone who likes to downplay what I do because I feel like actually that sort of helps me to get access with people. So typically, in all honesty, I just say, "Oh, don't mind me. I'm just a photographer." But what I really do is I'm a staff photographer at the Boston Globe. I have the very great privilege there to be able to tell longer term stories, which is sort of a thing that not everybody gets to do anymore these days. So that's huge. So I spend a lot of time doing that. But I still do like the daily, 2 or 3 assignments every day. Could be like a scene of a shooting or a high school football game or a child's birthday party, or sometimes all 3 in one day. Um,
So on to the discussion of your 5 images. I think I think you'd let me know that it was a bit of a challenge to come up with 5 images. Tell us about whether it was difficult or hard, and what you went through in making the decision for the 5 images you chose.
it was absolutely agonizing. I mean, there are so many incredible photographers out there. There are photographers who are like so near and dear to my heart. And when I was going through, I was thinking like, how could I possibly leave out Eugene Richards, right? Like he's been like a guiding light of photography for me. But at the end of the day, I was sort of trying to follow your brief, which was, photographs. So um, I decided to come up with a framework that might help. And so I was like, okay, I need to pick photographers and images that to me were like signposts along the way of my career, kind of pointing me in the direction that I wanted to go. Um, and he was like, still, I think, as you know, I didn't email you my last image until 8 o'clock this morning. And I'm sorry about that. But it is really, really hard. When we edit big stories, we often talk about like, you have to kill your darlings. You have to kill the images that are the closest to your heart. And that's how this felt. Like this felt painful to me. So,
Well, I'm sorry to have put you through that, but I'm glad to be able to talk to you about the 5 images you ended up with.
it was also, I will say, a very beautiful meditation on photography, and I really appreciate the assignment.
Oh, it makes me feel good. Let's take a look at your 5 images. And we start with an image that is both photojournalism and, in my mind, art, that of Josef Kudelka. And this is the moment when Russia invaded Czechoslovakia. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the day after. So they had invaded sort of the day before, and everybody had gone out into not this square, but a different square to kind of peacefully protest. And they thought that there would be no provocation, and the troops turned on them. And so everybody went home at the end of that day. And the Russians had kind of spread this rumor, as I understand it, that there was going to be a protest at 5 o'clock and that they should come. And the Czech radio caught wind of it and told everybody to stay home. And so here's Kudelka. He's in the square. It's 5:01. Nobody's there, right? And to me, this image it is actually a very beautiful marriage of sort of photojournalism and art photography, right? Because he does this thing that I'm not so sure I could actually do as a photojournalist, right? He like kind of he breaks that fourth wall and he thrusts his arm into the frame.
Yes. Becomes part of the story. He inserts himself. Yeah.
Totally does. But to me, this is an image that is like so tremendously thoughtful, right? Anybody who saw this image the next day would completely understand its meaning right away, wouldn't have to read a caption, would just completely know this is what happened. And so, like I was talking about, like people being sort of signposts, right? Kudelka, I think, was someone who I kind of learned about very early on in my career, like probably when I was still in college and had just picked up a camera for the first time. And I was thinking still about, moments of light and composition. And here's Kudelka, and he's like taking it to this just complete next level, right? Like he's showing you how to be thoughtful, how to consider a story, what elements should you think about referencing when you're telling a story. And I don't know, like so much of his life, I think, was so influential too, right? Like after this image and all of the images that he takes during this revolution, he becomes an exile, he becomes stateless. The photos that you see after that, they're all just this meticulously crafted, perfect, black and white, very contrasty, very beautiful images that are like perfectly layered, exquisitely seen. And he devotes his entire life to his craft. He's got nowhere to live. He's basically like carrying a sleeping bag and a couple of pairs of shirts and I think one pair of pants a year. Like he was monastic in his devotion to his craft. And I think for me at the age of 20, when I learned about all of this, I was like, oh my God, he's like the Jack Kerouac of photography, except like for real. And that really was like I don't know, to my mind, I think it was just like a bit of a guiding force. Like, if you really want to do this and you really want to do it right, kind of have to give up a lot and marry yourself to it.
And in Boston, there is a legend of Stan Grossfeld, and you work with Stan at the Boston Globe, and you've selected this image.
I do work with Stan at the Boston Globe, and that's why I'm pretty confident he's never going to see this. Otherwise, it's awkward to talk.
Well, I was going to ask you to invite him on the program.
I totally will. I totally will. No, Stan is, I do feel so tremendously lucky to be able to work with him because he really is one of my sort of early photographic heroes. And when I was in college, everybody sort of knew Stan Grossfeld as the guy that had won 2 Pulitzers. But for me, it was this book that he had put together, which is called Lost Futures Are Forgotten Children. And this was one of the images from that book where he had traveled around the world and just documented children living in poverty. And the body of work is really an indictment. It asks the question, how could we as a civilized society allow this to happen to children? And this image, I think, is a very powerful one from the United States that is asking that same question. I think when you look at this frame, for me at least, my eye sort of immediately goes to the little boy that's like laying on top of the car, and he looks a little bit resigned, and you start to kind of flow around what's happening in this frame, and you see this image, and kind of immediately this family is living out of this car. And you see the mom sort of crammed in the back. And there's like a quiet sort of power to this image in my mind. I think what Stan does here and what he does throughout the rest of this book is sort of a testament to who he is and what he believes in. And it's a testament to the type of empathy that he has for his subjects and the care that he takes in trying to get you to look at an image, right? I think there's a way in which this image is almost beautiful in a strange way, right? And it kind of grabs you and makes you want to keep looking. And I think that often is something that photojournalists try to do. We're an interesting bunch because I mean, you'd have to, I suppose it's like person to person, but I personally don't consider myself to be an artist, right? I consider myself to be a journalist. And so, but it's a fine line what we do because we are looking for beautiful ways to tell a story and get people to connect with it. And I think that's what Stan's Photo does so well here.
Alex Webb, who has been represented on this program as, and honestly is, he really must be, I think, the most influential photographer of the modern day.
I would say yes, obviously. He's one of my top five. For me, I think when I look at the kind of progression of these images, to me, Alex Webb is like the Wizard of Oz moment, right? Like everything is black and white. And then all of a sudden, boom, Alex Webb sort of blows the doors off with color. And what he's doing in this image, I mean, like I had like 16 that, that I could have pulled from, but I've always loved this one in particular because it has so much going on in it, right? In that you've got flirtation, you've got family, you've got bureaucracy, you've got like a little bit of play with the baseball cards or whatever that is, football cards on the left. To me, he is just this kind of master of light and shadow and patience, right? Like,
Yeah.
talk about being monk-like, to be able to sit there and just wait until something comes together like this. I have tried. I do not have that level of patience, but I just love that he does. And I think that what Alex Webb does, at least for me, is he shows you how beautiful and complicated the world can be. He's a master of taming a chaotic situation and packing it all tightly into this little rectangle in this very layered and interesting way. Every bit of the frame adds a little bit more information and kind of keeps you guessing. I think he's just like absolutely brilliant.
So your next image, Chris Hondros, and boy, this is hard. Talk to me about this one, Jessica.
Yeah, so Hondros is a photographer that I think everybody should know, and it's part of why I wanted to include him today. He also was a friend of mine and was just an incredible photographer who was deeply thoughtful and committed to what he did. And most of what he did was work in war zones. And so this image is from Tal Afar, Iraq. It was taken in 2005. He was on a routine patrol with a group of soldiers who he was embedded with. And a car came speeding down the road and they signaled to the car to stop. I think they shouted to it and it didn't stop. And they opened fire on the car and the car came to a rolling stop, and they could hear the screams of children inside. And so these children get out of the car sort of dazed, and the soldiers take them to the side and they're checking on them. And here's this 5-year-old girl and she's wailing and she's covered in her parents' blood. And to me, this is an image that should have ended the war. This image went all around the world. It was published in a million different places. To me, this is like my generation's version of Nick Utt's famous photograph from Vietnam of the Napalm girl. But the way that we sort of processed images and take in news had changed at this point. And we were kind of no longer like a monoculture, right? It wasn't just that everybody saw the same images. And so I think this had less impact than it probably should have. But it didn't stop Hondros. He kept going back. I know he did at least 10 tours of 10 embeds with them in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he continued to cover wars until he was tragically killed in Libya in 2011. But Hondros was someone whose work I would really, really tell everyone, please go and look at. There's a book called Testament, and I think it's a really beautiful collection of what he did. He was an unflinching photographer, and I think for me, that's what it is about this image that really stands out and feels important. because I think that's, as a photojournalist, that's one of the hardest things that we do, right? Is to be present in a really difficult situation, but to know deeply that what you're doing in the moment, recording a moment like this, has the potential to make change.
Lisa Krantz, with your fifth image, the final image of your five, another touching one. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so Lisa Krantz is, or was at the time, a photographer working at a local newspaper, the San Antonio Express News. And this is one of many stories that Lisa has done that has sort of made her a guiding light for many of us in photojournalism. This is a story about, this is an image from a photo story about a little boy named Rowan who was suffering from a bone marrow disease. And so she followed him for 2 years. And in this moment, it's like every time I see this photo, it just devastates me, right? I mean, you have this little child sitting in a hospital room. You have all of the trappings of normalcy. You have like the elf on the shelf and the scattering of toys and the little crown that says Happy New Year. But this look like just lets you know that like something horrific is coming. And I know from having viewed the whole story, that Rowan doesn't, he passes away. And so this is kind of like his last New Year with his family in this hospital. And it's just one of those images that I think you can't look at and not feel something, right? And to me, I think it speaks to the power of being a local storyteller who kind of gets into stories on a granular level and just hangs out and gives it the time to see what's going to happen and follows it through.
Well, Jessica Rinaldi, five great images, and you have done a lovely job representing photojournalism on the Crit House and the MyFIVE series.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor. And it is incredible to be able to speak about all these people who are so near and dear to my heart. So thank you for that opportunity.
Well, what we love is being able to learn about photographers and photographs that we had not seen before, and you have absolutely done that for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching The Crit House.